That was Rebecca St. James and For King and Country with a song called Kingdom Come. Right before that, we had Kim Walker-Smith with Mama. You're on 94.9. It's 4:19, and we have Mike Cook on the line from New Zealand, Creation Ministries International. I mean, they are international, so having somebody from overseas sounds fairly normal. Good afternoon, Mike. How are you?
Good afternoon, Mick, and good afternoon to all your fine listeners. It's great to be joining you again from across the Tasman, and looking forward to where our conversation will go. But as always, it's a blessing to join with fellow brothers and sisters. We are international as a ministry, but also as Christians, of course, we're one in Christ, and we have that common bond, don't we, across ages and nationalities. So yeah, it's good to be back with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Mike, I believe you're you're very good with electronics. You've worked in the electronics business, technology businesses. You like to see how things work. You're very much into making sure that things work the right way. How did you become a Christian? Did it have anything to do with your, keenness to find out how things work?
That's a really good question, Mick. Yes, ever since childhood, I've always had an interest in how things work, and starting off with my first crystal set or taking an alarm clock apart and all those things, as kids do. But I was very blessed to be brought up in a Christian home, and so I guess I picked up by osmosis my own parents' faith and the difference it made for them. But yeah, through my teenage years, I didn't lose my faith, but I certainly struggled with being taught evolutionary stuff at high school, and then being taught the Bible at home and at church, and so I had a disconnect, but wanting to be a thinking young person. So it wasn't until I really engaged with hearing a creation message that helped me to realise the Bible does stack up, and the history contained within the Bible does make sense. So yeah, I didn't come to faith through that avenue, but certainly understanding creation and God as our designer and our saviour has been a powerful, boost to my faith over the years.
Absolutely. Now, Mike, just before you came on air there, we were having a little bit of a chat about bones.
Yes. Interesting, isn't it? So hopefully many of your listeners will know that we have, obviously, our website, creation.com. I do a plug for that again. It's just an amazing wealth of resources and articles and so on. But we also have Creation magazine that comes out 4 times a year. And I have in my hand here the very latest edition, the last one for this year, creation.com. Our magazine, and one of the articles in here is about people who have a mutation that causes their bones to be up to 8 times stronger and denser than normal people, so they basically never break a bone. And of course the evolutionary people are saying this is great evidence of evolution, there's something better than it was before. But in actual fact, when you look at it, it's actually a really bad thing to have happen. So it's another example of change giving some benefit. But
how's it bad?
Well, it's interesting, that. So first of all, it's caused by a mutation that causes osteocytes and things in your bones to grow overly, almost out of control. So your bones become thicker and denser.
Yep.
So the first disadvantage is that you become a lot heavier and you can't swim because you just sink like a rock. So that's bad. And then also as the channels in your spine and where other nerves go through openings in bones, as they grow tighter, that can put you into excruciating pain and numbness and so on as these nerve channels get compressed by the excess bone.
Yeah.
And there's also other issues and hormone problems and breathing problems that are caused by this. So, yeah, it's like sickle cell anemia. That gives you the advantage of not dying of malaria, but it has many, many other bad side effects. So the thing about change and mutation is it breaks things. Even if it gives you a small advantage in a situation, yes, but it's not actually evolution, it's actually devolution, I guess. So it's a great article. I hadn't thought of this. These poor folk with these super strong bones are actually not in a good space.
So seriously, if you swim, it actually makes you heavier.
Yes, you can't float easily when you've got this condition. Your bones are so much denser, and that can cause you to have negative buoyancy and have to struggle a lot harder to stay afloat.
Yep. And so I can only assume that over the years you'd probably end up with more arthritis as well because the weight of the bones wearing on each other.
That's right. There's just so many things. So again, natural selection, evolution would say, well, the fitter things will survive, but if you have this mutation, you're less able to run away from predators, or you're going to require more nutrition to sustain your body and so on. So it actually has a lot of even in the evolutionary story, a lot of disadvantages. It's not going to give you a lot of pluses apart from not breaking bones.
Now, we've heard you guys from Creation Ministries often mention, these, I guess, changes that happen, and they, pretty much start at the DNA, and then all of a sudden you get this change. Many times you've said it's de-evolution. These changes actually, cause other issues as well. They're most often not in a positive direction. Has there ever been any evidence of a change being positive, completely positive?
No. Again, we've got a huge range of excellent articles looking at natural selection, which is a scientific fact. I think genes do give advantages in certain situations, so they can be selected for and passed on to the next generation. But in every case, where there's change, it always has at a cost, and it's always genetically a downward. It's a decrease in actual specified complexity in the information. So, for example, you may have a fish living in a cave where it's very, very dark. It's got trapped in there, and it ends up with a mutation causing its eyes not to develop. So it's an eyeless fish. Mm-hmm. So that actually is an advantage because it won't scratch its eyes and get infections and so on. So it doesn't need eyes, and so that fish actually has an advantage in that situation, and so that blind fish will actually increase in numbers, and the ratio of the population will increase. And so that's a negative change. You've lost information on how to make an eye, but you have a local advantage of not ending up with eye infection. So, that's the sort of example we have. And even antibiotic resistance or cormorants, in the Galapagos losing their wings and so on. There's lots of changes that can give you a bit of an advantage locally, but overall you're less fit and less varied than the ancestor types.
Yes. I mean, I often look at the the biblical stories and the biblical ages, Adam and Eve and their children and how long they lived, and you sort of think they had something better than us, didn't they? And we have obviously broken down over the years because we just can't live as long as they did.
That's right. Yes, exactly. And as your listeners will know, the whole Bible's account of history, because the Bible's not a science book, but it is a history book, and it contains a lot of history from obviously creation right through the fall and then the flood and then the dispersion at Babel. And those areas have statements that have a genetic or a geological or biological consequence. So we can actually test what we see in the modern world and say, if this happened, if there were two original ancestors, and if there's been a bottleneck of the genetics at the flood, etc., would we see evidence of that today, or the flood itself, or the geology? And yes, we do. We have so much evidence that points to the fact that the Bible's account of history, genetically, geologically, archaeologically, prophetically, is just so powerful. And so, we are certainly nowhere near as fit genetically than our ancestors were. Every generation is accumulating like rust in a car, bit by bit. Genetic breakdown happens.
Yep.
Often too subtle to see between generations, but over many generations we become very, very degraded from the original.
Absolutely. You are on 94.9. We've been listening to Mike Cook from Creation Ministries International, and we'll be back with you after a bit of a break. Okay, and that was one of our Christmas songs. Merry Christmas, everybody. You're on 94.9. It is 21 minutes to 5. We have Michael Cook on the line from New Zealand, from Creation Ministries International. And, of course, Mike and I have been having a chat about what we're doing over Christmas. And Mike mentioned, so many things happening, as most people have over Christmas. But one thing in particular, he said, and straight after Christmas, we've got a big conference on over in New Zealand. And it's actually a Creation Ministries. They're calling it a super conference. So, Mike, I've got to ask what a super conference is. And it's called Origins and Horizons. What is that all about?
That's a really good question, Matt. So you're welcome again to your listeners. So we've generally had the larger conferences for Creation Ministries have been in Australia, and there's been some fantastic ones over the years. The most recent one that I went to was in 2018 at the Sunshine Coast up in Queensland, and it was really fantastic. But anyway, we've got our first big conference in New Zealand, in Auckland, from the 6th to the 10th of January. We've got a number of international speakers and local speakers as well. So if any of your listeners are interested in maybe jumping over the Tasman to come over and have some of our good hospitality, if you look at creation.org.nz, that's a special website. So creation.org.nz, that's the website for our origins and horizons. So we're just looking at the whole thing back to origins, the whole thing of back to, I guess, creation and the history in Genesis, but also the horizons of reaching out to those around us, giving them an effective reason to believe the Bible and to, of course, the God who's given us that. So it's looking back, but also looking forward and outwards is the focus. So it's evangelism, science, apologetics, whole range of different topics, from dinosaurs to race and culture to biology, rafting in the Grand Canyons, Egyptology, why does God allow suffering, so many different topics. So anyone's welcome to come. We'd love to have you over here.
Yeah, wow. And I noticed your first speaker will be Vance Nelson from Canada, talking about dinosaurs and human migration. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Vance is a very talented author. He's written a series of really beautiful coffee table sort of grade books with different topics. And one of them, his most famous, I guess, is called Dire Dragons. And that's taking the idea that many cultures have depictions in their legends and their artwork and sculptures and stories and tapestries and so on, of things that are basically very dinosaur-like. They call them dragons, but they're reptilian or large creatures.
Yes.
And they've modeled these things, drawn these things, carved these things, all around, from South America to the UK to Pacific into Africa and so on. So many cultures must have seen dinosaur-like creatures back in the day, and so they lived alongside them, they experienced them to be able to draw them and to carve them. So he's gone through looking at the fossil record, these reconstructed creatures from the amazing paleontology we have, and then looked at similar-looking creatures in these artworks. And just it's stunning the way he's brought this to life, that the Bible would say, the dinosaurs were created on day 6, and there would have been representatives of dinosaur kinds on the ark, small ones, of course.
Yep.
And then after the flood, they would have moved out and started to spread again, but they just really couldn't cope and eventually became extinct, including being hunted by humans, St. George and the Dragon, the last of the eco-warriors, not. So it's a fascinating book. He's a great speaker, amazing guy.
It is interesting, isn't it? I mean, we look at artworks from, all over the world, and rarely do you see anything from, millions of years ago. This is old artworks I'm talking about. However, quite often you look at Chinese artwork and, even Scotland on different flags and stuff. There's so many, dinosaurs or, these things quite often, they look like they're breathing fire. But you sort of think, okay, well, how can they be the only things brought forward from millions of years ago? It just doesn't fit, does it? It just doesn't make sense.
It's just another line of evidence that we really see that the Bible's account can be true. And, of course, I'm sure that I have, and I know many of your Creation Ministries, my colleagues who have spoken on your channel, have on your station rather, have actually talked about dinosaur soft tissue and finding degraded red blood cells in unfossilized dinosaur bone and osteocytes and stuff. They cannot be millions of years old. And of course the word dinosaur wasn't coined until 1841. It was Richard Owen coined that thing. Before then they were called dragons. Even Encyclopedia Britannica talked about sea dragons and land dragons. So dinosaurs were previously called dragons in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I find it fascinating, the Creation Ministries stuff they talk about. You guys make sense of these things and make sense. It seems to fit the biblical timeline. It just doesn't seem to fit the, evolutionary timeline. These things, even in artworks, it doesn't fit their timelines. And so often we speak to you guys, and I know when I finish chatting, it's just like, that just made so much sense. I love hearing it.
Okay, one other thing, I've got time there, just to do a little plug for it. Creation Ministries has a whole range of different resources, but one of them is our YouTube channel. So I really encourage your listeners to go to our YouTube channel. We've got a whole range of videos on there. One of them recently came out, or fairly recently, with Dr. Grocott, who's an Australian industrial chemist, PhD, and he has a fascinating testimony of how he came from passive evolutionist to being a vibrant Bible-believing Christian, but still doing amazing science. And his testimony is very, very powerful. And he talks about all the evidence that he saw in his science and in the real world that just totally blew away the millions of years. He said this is why wasn't I told this? So I really encourage you to go to our channel, have a look down, testimony after testimony from PhD scientists and people who are thinkers. They love their science, but they love the Lord, and so it's a real treasure trove of really uplifting, encouraging testimonies.
Wow. So his name again?
His doctor, I think it's Stephen Grocott.
Okay, Dr. Stephen Grocott.
Grocott, yeah. He and his wife, Diane, she's a medical doctor and psychiatrist, and their testimony, they've served the Lord for years in apologetics and so on, but they are both very scientifically literate, and he's got patents and peer-reviewed articles and so on. But yeah, he's come from this point of view of a Christian faith, but realising that the world makes so much sense through a biblical lens.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Check that out on our Creation Ministries International YouTube channel.
Yep. And I found his name, Stephen, Stephen, Grocott, Grocott. Yeah, very interesting.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Great to interview.
Awesome. Well, it's pretty much that time of day again. We've got to say goodbye and wish you a very, very, very Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Beck, and I certainly really appreciated being on your channel. It's a privilege to come along and just have a chat, and I wish all your listeners the very greatest blessings over the Christmas break. Remembering, of course, it's all about Jesus, our Creator and Saviour. But next year, may 2025 be a great time of blessing for you and your families. And I look forward to talking to you next year. I'll be back.
Thank you very, very much. That was Mike Cook from New Zealand, and I'm sure, we'll enjoy hearing him again next year. It is 13 minutes to 5. You're on 94.9.